Well, first I want to say that I'm honored to share this planet with each and every one of you. And I come to Earth by way of Huntsville in the Gallant South, Alabama, a little further up and over. And I want to keep this more casual than formal or even academic for that matter. So if I say something that inspires or triggers a question, feel free to get a hand up, and I can address the question right then and there. Generally, I prefer the moderator style over the lecture style because it's a little bit more interactive, and I like to be interactive. So, as she said, my name is I was born John Moore. I didn't realize my name was John until first grade when I got there, because before that I was always Little Johnny. And so when I decided in right around 2000 to leave teaching to go full time into art, I was rounding a corner, headed home, and I felt a freeness that I hadn't felt since probably a child. And I use the word freeness because that's way more open rather than freedom, because that still symbolizes a domain. So this freeness, and I knew I didn't want to sign my work J. Moore anymore. So I thought about what I was called as a child. I was Little Johnny. I was everything that went with Johnny was me. So I decided to go with that, but I chose a different spelling. Ni being from, and Jah meaning being a poetic form of Jah or Yahweh, the Creator. So I feel that everything I do is a reflection of this divine blueprint that we already have here. So in essence, I create nothing new. I simply take what's there and do a sort of a social repurposing into what we have come to call art. And what you see as the final representation of that process for me is literally the epiphenomena, or the smoke on the fire. The actual work takes place when I'm in my studio, which I call the sanctuary. I also call it the playground, and I also call it the church. Okay, and it's simply an acronym for "Come Help Us Restore Cosmic Harmony." And when I go in there, I'm never alone. Okay, when I walk in, I greet the space, I speak out loud, and it happened to be a former church as well. And I get busy doing what I do in terms of my work. And I work on multiple projects at a time. And maybe that's a touch of ADHD, but if one project stumps me and says, leave me alone, I'll go to another one, and it's different mediums and varieties of work that I do. So in the red clay process, this red clay journey, it's if you grew up in Alabama or certain parts of Georgia or other places, like there's some in Mississippi, you're familiar with the Alabama red clay or the Southern red clay. And it's very unforgiving. It was a step from my childhood. We played with it. It stained our shoes, our feet, our hands. We even ate it. The elders knew where to go and dig just the right clay, and it had this most interesting flavor, and we would eat it. So, when children eat dirt, as we say, there's probably something to that. But I learned as I got older, it was the iron in the clay that the bodies were craving. So that's the purpose behind that. And also, too, when I think about the clay and why I work with it, it also, for me, symbolizes the blood. Because the hemoglobin, the red blood cells, the iron that we have, and then the iron present in the red clay. We think about the idea or the fact that there are 102 minerals in the earth, also 102 minerals in our body. So we share this union with the clay. And so it talks about, to me, our origin. So when I'm painting with this red clay, I feel as though I'm actually painting with a living substance. One of my professors shared with me in my undergrad years that my success was inevitable because this Alabama red clay is rich with the blood of our ancestors. I didn't think much about that until years later. In fact, I have to admit that I was literally almost ashamed of being from Alabama. In fact, when I went to school at Alabama A&M University, I told everybody I was from Atlanta. Although literally I was from just across the hill, about 2 or 3 miles away from the campus. But I wanted to be from somewhere else because I had not gained an appreciation of home. So years later, I drove to Pennsylvania from home, left in the rain, had motor in my car. I got there, I was going to a funeral, And I pulled up. When I walked out of the house, the funeral home attendants were gathered around my car. And so I'm wondering what's going on here. So I walked down to ask what was the issue. And they said, well, what is this on your car? It looks like mud, but it's red. I said, oh yeah, that's the color of the clay or the soil in Alabama. And all the questions came, all kinds of questions. And all of a sudden, this clay that I never had thought much about now was such an object of curiosity for these guys. And I would go to different places while I was there. And being from the South, I'm going to speak to you if I walk by. But there, when you walk past somebody, all my relatives had told me, don't go speaking to everybody. And don't go here, don't go there, all these restrictions. But the Alabama came out in me. So everywhere I went, I was speaking to people. I was talking to people. I started establishing acquaintances, and people were expecting to see me. I remember I walked into a barbershop one day, and this guy said, he said, you got from Alabama, right? And I said, yeah. He said, I heard about you. So we started this conversation. We went back and forth on philosophy, religion, and everything. And he said, man, I said, I appreciate you. I appreciate you. There's a story I want to tell about that one, but I don't want to get this long. So I'm gonna put that to the side right now and leave it. If you want to hear that story, I'll tell it later. But back to the red clay. I was in Huntsville. There's a place called Stovehouse. It's fully up and functioning now. But before that, when they were in the process of getting everything together, they called me over to do a mural. So we're walking through this place, and we walk under this awning where the walls had been removed, but the floor was still just a dirt floor. And as we walked through this clay, this dust that probably hadn't seen rain in 100 years or so, because it was an old manufacturing company. And it rose up around us as we walked, and it reminded me of spirits, like talcum powder. And I'm looking around at this dust, and I asked the guy, I said, can I take some of that with me? He said, take it all. So I took some, I put it in a container, and I took it back to the school where I was working at the time, and I put it on my desk. It sat there for a few days, and I guess it started to speak to me, because one day I took it out, I mixed some with water, and I had an index card, and I painted something on the back of it, and it felt right. And I did like 3 of these paintings, and my students started commenting on them. So I took 2 of them, I got some makeshift frames, and I put them in there, and I had them in my house on the south side, so literally got sun all day. But several years later, when I opened my studio, it had not faded at all. And so I had an event, actually it was a studio visit, and a group called Leadership Huntsville, they had 3 tours that day. And a lady asked about the red clay paintings. And I said, well, these are some experimental works I'm doing. She said, well, how much are they? And when you catch an artist off guard like that, it's like, okay, I ran back through these corridors, and I gave her a price. She said, oh, I'll take them both. And I said, okay. So she bought both the pieces. And another lady came and said, do you have any more of the red clay pieces? I said, well, I don't. So the next day, the next couple of days, this was on a Sunday, I got a call from Historic Huntsville. And they said, well, people are coming in and they're asking about the red clay pieces because Vicky her name was Vicky Van Valkenburg. She said she had bought some and she was telling everybody about them. I said, well, I could probably do some more. They said, can you have us some by Friday? And I said, probably so. I mean, they were pretty small. And so I got some watercolor paper, and this time it was more intentional. It wasn't necessarily experimentation. And I wanted to come up with something that had meaning. I didn't want to go with the abstract figures. So I decided to call it the Southern Trees series, because when you talk about the gallant South, the whole idea of the trees, the roots, the leaves, all that's very, very important and very, very powerful as imagery. So I did these, I did 4 trees. I took them in on Friday morning. She called me back Friday afternoon and she said, do you have any more of those, the Southern Trees series, the red clay pieces? I said, no, but I can have some by next week. In probably about 2 months, I was churning out these red clay pieces. And then at a point, it started to feel commercial. You know, they were just wanting them left and right. And I said, I want to experiment more with this rather than just churning them out. And of course, one part of me says, but it's consistent dollars coming in every week. But if there's any artist in the room, although the money's important, the dance with the work, the integrity of the work is way more important for me. So I started to experiment with different things. And I sent some of those, and they also went. And then I got a call one day from Deloitte. It's a company called Deloitte. and they said, we want a large red clay piece for in our entrance. And I had seen their entrance, and it's just so happened that Deloitte, their building is right next to where I pulled the first red clay. So I went down, looked at the space, well lit, and I did a piece that was about 4 feet by 2 feet. And it took a while because it's actually a sort of a sculpting process. And I gave them a price. They didn't blink. And I was, of course, happy about that. I took it down. And so now it's still hanging in their space. So at that point, I started to do mixed media. And from then, I remember calling my daughter in Alaska, and I told her, I said, I'm working with red clay now. And she said, well, Daddy, that's you. You've always loved red clay. I wasn't aware that I always loved it, but apparently as my child, my second born, she was aware because I must have talked about it a lot. So I started doing these red clay pieces, different varied sizes. And then I started getting more calls for the red clay, more calls for the red clay. And the more I worked with it, the more at home I felt with the medium. And then I got somebody who actually mailed me some red clay from Georgia to do a piece. And then the spiritual significance started to flow through even more. Because you think about the idea of having something that we walk on every day. And you think about the blood, sweat, and tears of our ancestors poured into this substance century after century. And my being able to take this from the earth, bring it up again, and use it as a site-specific medium to create something that once again lives before the people. So this resurrection process for me is very important and also very moving, and something that I humbly go before on a daily basis in my studio. And I can't talk enough about the red clay and what it does, and the whole idea of being site specific. One example is right here. I crossed the bridge in Tuscaloosa. I got a call from the Natural Science Museum, and there was a gentleman by the name of Jefferson Davis Jackson. And I thought the irony of his name, he was a black man, Jefferson Davis Jackson, and he worked for the university for 66 years, starting at the age of 11. And he worked right along beside the professor, the doctor, I can't think of his name right now. I think Edwin was his first name. And the archaeologist, and he labeled, he did some of the same work. He traveled with him all those years to, I think, every county in Alabama doing this work. And he had never been acknowledged. And they wanted to acknowledge him. And I said, yes, I can do it, but I have to make a trip there and to gather clay. So I came down, we talked, they filmed the whole thing. I went and gathered clay from the campus. They gave me cases, things he'd actually written on. And then I need to get to the Alabama River or the Warrior River to get water. They said, well, there's one spot. They told me where it was. And when I went there, it was blocked off. And she said, well, I'll see if we can go get permission. And so she's gone. I'm thinking, this is a little chain right here. I can run down there. And so I told my daughter, I said, you wait right here. And so I hopped the chain and went down, scooped up the water, and came back. And by the time she was coming back, of course, I had the water already. So for me, having that water from that river is very, very important because I want everything to be site specific. And we know the connection between water and the spirit, or comparison of water and the spirit. So putting those two elements together and actually getting a chance to once again allow this red clay to breathe, to live again in our presence. So at this point, because I can keep storytelling all day, if there's a question you want to ask me, feel free to jump in. Yes.
I have two. One, how old was your daughter?
Mm-hmm.
Because I have a 14-year-old daughter, and I feel like I'm just curious. Second, the work that you did with the red clay, do you use a brush? Do you use your finger? Like, how do you, because you do exquisite detail with something that's just water and mud, and it's amazing.
Gotcha.
So I was just curious what your utensils were.
Okay. Well, speaking of daughters, I have a shirt that says, you don't scare me. I have 3 daughters. So I have 3 daughters. One is 30, one is 21, and one is 13.
Yeah, mine's currently 14.
14, okay.
And I got a 12 and a 10 also.
Gotcha. Are all daughters?
No, oldest is a daughter, the other 2 are boys.
Okay, okay. Yes. Boys, I have to say this, and this, I hope this, boys are so much easier. So much easier. Yes. In terms of what I paint with, I use my fingers sometimes. And I use different grades of clay. I actually, I grind the clay. I use a mortar and pestle. You know, I feel like I said, I'm in the lab. And I use varying degrees of clay mixed with different levels of water to get sometimes textures, but also tones and intensities. And some areas, the clay is actually lighter, more of a pink color. And then you go to areas like Limestone County, it's like a deep red. So in my studio, I have these boxes, and I always try to go with wooden boxes. Cigar boxes seem to work best. And I have clay from all over Alabama and outside of Alabama, and they're labeled with where they came from.
I mean, the consistency in this show is amazing.
Yes, most of this came from some of the same clay because it's a unified show. So I wanted everything to kind of come from the same area. I use brushes, I use matchsticks, I use Q-tips, I use whatever, that I want to work with at the time, because I have to admit that it is, does bring some of the same joy as playing in the mud. To start out with a blank sheet of paper, have the idea, and take something that actually came straight from the earth and put that on the paper, that feels really good in my chest. And I still love to paint with paint, but it's something very satisfying. Now, if you want to talk about sustainability and green work, I mean, you can't get any more than that. And someone said, well, what if it fades? Well, this place has been here for a long time, and I've never seen any of that red clay go from red to white or red to fade. It's not going to fade, because the iron oxide actually bonds into the paper and it seals. Now, I do spray it with a fixative once I'm done, a low odor fixative, and then fix it to the paper. And I have pieces that are years and years old, and they don't look any different, even though, I keep it in the sun just to see what happens. In fact, when the sun hits it, it actually comes alive even more. It has this shimmer. Yes.
So, as a writer, the feedback, the response is always that a product can be done but not finished.
Mm-hmm.
The concepts, like, you've worked on it for so long, we call it, you can keep chiseling and chiseling and chiseling. Do you consider these, do you consider them a finished product? Although you say, man, I want to work on this one again, but I got to be done because I got to do something else. Does that make sense?
Yes, very much so. In fact, one of my professors in school told me I had a tendency to overwork.
Yeah.
So they said pull back at different times. Some pieces I will really work, but as an artist, I always feel like when I go back and look at work that I did last week, I could have done this, I could have done that, I could have done that. But I think that's that mechanism in us that keeps us pushing toward a level of perfection or godness. Because if we feel like we've arrived, I listened to an interview the other day, a Kobe Bryant interview, and they asked him, was he driven more by the winning or the fear of losing? And he said neither. He said, because when I'm in the game, and I'm paraphrasing, I'm thinking about the game. How do I make myself better in the game? Each player becomes almost like a chalkboard that I work with. He said, because if you think about the winning, that becomes something that distracts you from the game. If you think about the losing, it gives you a type of fear that will also distract from the game. Because if you look at that, you think about how children play. They're having fun. To me, an elementary school playground is one of the most powerful energy-producing places on the planet, because they're not thinking about outcomes. And oftentimes when we're working, going to work, doing this, we think about the outcome, and then in that moment, we're not present. Which reminds me of something I shared with a student once. She was really worried about, and this ties in with this too, a test she had to have. Because she said, what if this is wrong with me, and what if this is wrong with me? And I was sitting there listening to her, because she was talking to some friends first. And of course, as an educator, we hear everything pretty much in our presence. And then she said, I said, well, what's going on? You look like you're really distraught about something. She said, well, Mr. Moore, I have this situation, and she told me about this test she's going to have to take. I said, well, let's look at it this way. Right now, right here, you're okay. I'm talking to you, you're talking to me. Next week, you'll take this test. Up until then, you don't know what that test is all about. And then last week, you may not even been thinking about the test. I said, any of your fear and anxiety is coming from your expectations in the future. Any of your guilt or grief is from your past. But if you're in the here and now, everything, you're okay. You're okay. So when I'm in the work, my goal is to be in the work. And my wife will attest to this, and she gets something about this. Have you eaten yet? When I'm in the work, food, water, sometimes I don't think about it because I'm in it, and I'm totally in it. That's why, being at my studio when I'm in there, it's a place where I can't. I should talk about a euphoria. Now, there's some times when I'm battling, because the peace will battle me. It'll work against me. I remember I did a piece a few years ago. I'd finished it, and I knew it wasn't there, but I wanted to say I'm done. So I took a picture, as I normally do, photographed it, and I sent it to my wife, and she said, "Oh, it doesn't look like you. I don't feel it." And I was like, well, yeah, I was thinking the same thing. I was hoping she would say, yeah, it's good, so I can go ahead and make myself go with it. So it had a deadline, though. And this was like on a Friday. The deadline was like Monday. And I'm thinking, I got to start over, because the person who's coming in to receive this piece, it's not like they're coming back the next week. So I emailed the people, and I told them, I said, I'm reworking the piece. I don't like what I did at all. And I sent it to him. He said, well, we think it looks fine. I said, no. I got to have it looking fine. So I spent that whole week working on the piece. And I sent it. I drove it straight to the place the next week. I finished it, got it to the framer, did the little extra percentage or whatever, and went straight there. And wasn't able to stay. And so the next day, the director called me. And he said, I'm so glad we did what we did. And he said some other words I can't quite remember right now. But in other words, it was a hit. The woman, she was overheard over the whole Southeast region, including Puerto Rico, and they had presented to her as a gift. And I had gathered clay from the housing sites in the area, the public housing sites, and did the piece. And they said she actually cried. And she said she never received anything like that before. And they said she couldn't stop looking at it. And her whole presentation ended up being about the piece. And he said, well, her position is a paid elected position. I'm not sure how long she'd be there, but I think she's going to be there for a while. But however long she's there, we know she's a friend of ours. And she controls millions of dollars that can come to us. I'm thinking, wow, I should have charged more. If my work can open up millions of dollars, then hey, maybe we should have done something different. But it's that right there. Even more so than the funds received for me, it was the fact that it moved her to that degree. That's what's important to me. Because I feel that spirit recognizes spirit. And when you think about the earth, there's a quote that says, it talks about the blood being language without memory. And if you think about that, blood being language without memory, and what connects us all as human beings, as animals, is that lifeblood. The other day we were at the Natural Science Museum, and I'm walking through and I'm looking at the fish, I'm looking at all the different animals, and I'm thinking, all of these things are alive. The breath of life is flowing through each creature, no matter how small. And once you look at that, and then you look at the vastness of the universe, you realize how precious this thing is we have called life. And I think the arts, is one of those things that can serve as a proverbial foot of the cross. And if we could get an appreciation of the arts in humanity to the extent to where they can see the connection between us, because this space between us is also the space that connects us. And once we understand this, I cannot look at you without seeing a part of me. I cannot look at you without seeing a part of me. And once I can appreciate that, to me, that brings us into a level of appreciation. And I use the word godness on purpose, because to me, that's the universal connector, that I have to see my fellow man as a part of myself. So, and with that being said, art for me is an acronym, a resurrecting truth. A resurrecting truth. What is it that makes you live? What makes you want to get up every day? And if you've lost that, if you've lost sight of that, I invite you to travel back to your childhood days and think about those things that you love to do even when you were not getting paid. That you love to do when nobody was saying very, very good, or you need to go and do this. Those things you just love to do, and just brought you that joy inside. Because I think in that you will find the seed of your, and I use this word very careful, of your calling. Okay? The seed of your purpose. And when I think about that whole thing, I look at myself as a Dr. Frankenstein. Not one consumed by the desire to be like a divinity, but the one that realized that I'm the thumbprint of divinity. And if you talk about a painting being a Picasso, if it's a Picasso, then if I was created by divinity, then I too am that. And when I create work, the work becomes that. And hopefully people will see the work and they will be able to see themselves in that. With that, I'll ask, are there any more questions? Grunts, gripes, or groans? Yes.
I was born in South Carolina. The clay there, so it's very similar to the whole Southeast. I was just thinking about that.
Mm-hmm.
My granddaddy and his Buick station wagon would take us in Greater South Carolina to go fishing, and I remember the clay. I'm 60 years old, almost 61, and I think about it at 5 years old, just like it's yesterday. Before I moved to Kentucky, and he's from Kentucky, the bluegrass. I put my feet in the bluegrass last week, ground.
Yes.
But I miss the clay, because if you are from the South, the clay is.
Oh yeah, it's us.
Remembered forever.
That's it. It's us. And a few weeks ago, I had the opportunity to be on a artist talk with two other artists, Lysander Bryant, who's from further down in Alabama, and Toyin Odatula, who's originally from Nigeria, Yorubaland. And so when we were up on stage, I talked about the red clay, and I pulled out a vial of red clay. And I said, this is the medium that I use, and the stories that come from it. I can't talk about that without thinking about the stories my uncle told, the stories my grandmother told, and aunts. It takes me back. And so Lysander reached down, he pulls out this jug, and it has clay in it. Now, Toyin didn't mention the clay, but as I studied about Yorubaland, Nigeria, the clay is also red there. When I looked, they showed the ground, the red earth. And I don't know if you guys have seen the movie Sinners, but Delroy Lindo, they asked him how did he find that energy, where did he go inside of himself to find the energy for the character Delta Slim? And he said, actually, I was back at home in Jamaica, walking across the red clay. Of course, I stopped right there. I said, wow, there it is again. There it is again. So when I talk about red clay, and when I use red clay as a medium, it literally becomes becomes agency for delivering the message. Because we know that in the South, we're storytellers. And when you sit on the porch, I remember sitting on the porch and listening to the old gentleman up the street, Mr. Ragland, tell me stories. And he told me stories. I would just sit there and hear those stories. I never got tired of those stories. And even when he passed away, I think a part of him came to me because I too became one of those storytellers. And with that being said, I'm going to bring this to a close because I will tell you stories all night about myself in the red clay. And with my children, my goal is to immerse them in nature. And so now we brought in the nephews, and they're about to, take them to the water, and they're about to become nature's children as well. And if you're young parents and you have young children, please watch your children very closely at a young age, and they will tell you. Their actions will tell you. Those seeds are there. All those hints are there. What they're going to do when they get older. Okay. How did Tiger Woods' parents know? I saw a picture of Branford and Ellis Marsalis in the snow with trumpets. Their parents saw something and they fed into it. So when they get to their teen years, their early 20s, they're not, trying to figure it out and find themselves, you have already helped to ground them and lead them into themselves. So just keep that in mind. Watch those children closely, because they'll tell you. They'll tell you who they're going to be. All right. Any more questions? All right. I'm honored to share this space with you. Thank you for your time.